One of the nice things about being wealthy is the realization that you can actually do something good with that wealth. So in this final episode, we'll be looking at how you can get more bang for your charitable buck. I'm Lynn, and welcome to the final episode of When the Bears Are Out, Invest Wise. In the old days, a wealthy person would donate money to a good cause on the give and forget principle. But modern high net worth individuals are much more demanding about what they give their money to and how that cash is used. And contrary to the impression that hard-nosed Asians aren't interested in good cause investments, a recent study by Capgemini and Merrill Lynch showed that high net worth individuals in Asia actually put more of their portfolio into socially responsible investments than Americans or Europeans. You're watching When the Bears Are Out, and with me is Terry Farris from UBS. Terry, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Terry, what's a sensible way of giving away a lot of money, which makes sense?
Well, I think that philanthropy is a personal endeavor for each individual. I think the first thing you need to do is to say, what is my motivation? How do I want to be engaged in it? Looking at what is your passion? Where do you want to support? Starting very simply with those three areas and then moving out from that point.
But that means you do have to sort of settle with yourself what it is that I'm interested in.
Yes.
Yeah.
And many times it's very difficult for individuals to even come up with what am I interested in. There are so many areas that I can focus on. It could be education, it could be social services, healthcare. But it's good for an individual to focus in one area and start at that point before moving into many areas.
Okay, so you would recommend looking at one specific area that you want to give money to?
Correct. I think that it is important for an individual to be specific. If you focus in one area, learn what the issues are, look at how to be engaged in it, and look at how to make a difference, you can then create the multiplier effect from there.
So what you're saying is that, in fact, many of the same principles that you applied to presumably how you made your money in the first place.
Exactly.
You need to apply to your philanthropic efforts as well.
Exactly. And what we're seeing is that philanthropy in Asia is moving away from individuals writing the check to more strategic philanthropy, taking the business-like approach.
What about the old way of doing it? In other words, you give the money and then let's forget about it. In other words, I've done my good deed, that's it.
I think the approach today is that individuals are starting to see that it takes 2 to 3 years before change can happen. We've seen recently in Singapore and the rest of Asia where accountability, transparency, where donors are starting to say, I need to be engaged. I want to learn firsthand what the issues are. I want to find out how my experience in my own business can also be part of that giving.
But doesn't that require a lot more effort? Because it means that you really have to be actively engaged as a philanthropist with your, so to say, cause for a very long time.
I don't think so. I think that each person, especially an entrepreneur or a business person, they've learned how to manage their time. And I think the key thing there is to say, what is realistic that I can be involved in? If I know that I don't have a lot of time, maybe I'll find an outside organization that will work with me to look and do the call for, projects in the region, who help me do the due diligence. And we're starting to see a new group of organizations that are able to help people who are extremely busy.
So they're spending that amount of time on the particular cause?
Oh, I'm working with an individual right now in Taiwan. He's about 45 years old. He's built his business. Now he's professionalized it. And he's actually stepped back and saying, over the next couple of years, I'm going to be chairman of the company, but I'm going to be focusing on my philanthropic initiatives because this is where I see the next stage of my life to be.
What about the argument, though, that some people say that meshing together a profit-making motivation or business principles into what essentially is desire for social change really it doesn't knit together well. You either want to give to benefit society or you want to make money. You can't have the two things together.
One of the things that we're starting to see is social enterprise. And social enterprise is where the individual is starting to look and say, look, I want to support the charity, but how do we help them remain sustainable? And so we're starting to see that business principles of starting small businesses that can provide jobs, support income, because most charities cannot do fundraising. I don't see a problem where you start to, from the very beginning, to say, look, we are going to focus on building a business plan that has social implications.
But there's no conflict of interest because, I mean, setting up the co-op is one thing, but how much then the farmer gets is another.
But I think that from the very beginning, and this is where we're starting to see where social entrepreneurs or venture capitalists or venture philanthropists are starting to say, we need to give the farmers back more money. You look at the issue that we're facing today in Asia, food shortage, food crisis. One of the things that hasn't happened is that business and philanthropists have not been focusing on agriculture and food. Because for the last 20, 30 years, you look at International Rice Research Institute, which was started by two philanthropists, by the Rockefellers and the Fords. When they came together, they said, we want to help feed in the 60s. We want to feed Asia because if we're able to feed the population, that will create the foundation for Asia to grow. It did. But over the last 10, 15 years, many governments have cut back on support to agriculture, and now we're starting to see we're going to have to refocus on it.
That's a very interesting point, Terry, but let's have a look at what some of the really big philanthropists in the West have been doing. Perhaps the best-known foundation is the one created by the world's richest man, Bill Gates. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Trust has a massive $37 billion in their charity kitty, and they've been big backers of malaria vaccines and education for minorities. In fact, they've been so good at this that Warren Buffett has even put his money into the pool, with a significant chunk of his billions now going to the Gates Foundation. We've seen a lot of very big foundations being set up in the U.S. Do we have that same sort of impetus equivalent here in Asia?
I believe Asians are some of the most generous people in the world. I've now spent 18 years working with Asian individuals and Asian families. Philanthropy is a core component of the lives of Asians. If it be family and philanthropy, it's almost synonymous with each other. You look at religion. Religion has played an important part. Philanthropy has always been part of Asian culture. It's just that we haven't talked about it. We haven't brought it forward because there hasn't been a need. One of the biggest changes that we have is that today, most Asians have had their money invested in their companies. Most Asians have had their money invested into property. Today, we're starting to see larger amounts of cash. So we're moving away from the traditional philanthropy where it was money in and out each year to where they're starting to put money into a foundation.
So a lot more money. We're going to see a lot more money going into philanthropic causes.
I believe that we will see more philanthropy being strategic. And being strategic, you look at our population is going to move from 6 billion to 9 billion. The needs in Asia will grow with that. I think the Asian Development Bank just said recently that 1 billion individuals could go back into poverty just because of food. So we're seeing models that are starting where people are willing to come together to look at how do we build capacity, how do we get the multiplier effect, but also how do I put assets aside that allow for my work that I'm doing to be long-term.
So get in there, but get in for the long term.
I would say so. Philanthropy is an incredible, life-changing experience. And I think that every individual should experience it, should get their children experienced in it. And I also believe that they should get their businesses involved in it.
Terry, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Don't go away. After the break, we'll be talking to one wise philanthropist and get his tips on what to do right.